I read something kind of interesting this morning. You remember what happened in Hawaii this week? They had the false alarm about the nuclear bombs and all that, or the bombs coming their way. And they asked one guy went surfing. And he said, "Why'd you go surfing?" He said, "Well, if you only had 4 hours to live, what would you do?" You go surfing, right? It's kind of interesting. Has nothing to do with what I'm going to talk about. But I want to do a survey. How many of you are morning people as opposed to night people, as you like to get up early? Yeah. But yet you come to the late service. That's kind of interesting, right? Most of the people in the morning service were morning people, but there were a couple who go, "No, I'm a night owl." I said, "Why are you here then," right? Anyway. So there are a couple of quotes I want to share with you from night people, because even though many of you said you were morning, how many night people again? I didn't get those. Okay, well, it's pretty even. So those of you who are night people will relate to these quotes. The first comes from the science fiction writer named Glenn Cook, who said, "Morning is wonderful. Its only drawback is that it comes at such an inconvenient time of the day." And then similarly, an inspirational writer named Melchior Lim said, "I believe there should be a better way to start each day instead of waking up every morning." I don't know how you do that, but still. Have you ever noticed that we don't hibernate like other animals? And I'm kind of curious about that. Why did that not happen to us? We have a short hibernation period during the evening. But we don't do like a lot of other animals do that hibernate during the winter. And I saw a cartoon picture the other day depicting several bears hibernating in a cave, but one bear is wide awake. And that bear says to itself, "Man, I really shouldn't have had that cup of coffee back in June." All that is a segue into what I want to say to you this morning, which is stay woke. Stay woke. And by the way, this is not a sermon about drinking coffee or other caffeinated drinks, because recently I've been told I need to cut down on the caffeine. And I should make one thing perfectly clear: sleep is good. You need sleep. 6 hours minimum, up to 8 hours. You need to have your beauty rest. Not all of you, but some of you really need your beauty rest. But don't overdo the caffeine so you can get your sleep. So when I say stay woke, I'm not talking about missing sleep. I'm talking about something entirely different. You may already know this. Stay woke is urban slang for being aware of your surroundings and things that are going on in the world, particularly in terms of perceived injustices that are happening in the world. Stay woke. Although the phrase is used in other contexts as well, that's primarily where it comes from. That it first came into usage that we know of back in 2009. It came from a song by an artist named Erykah Badu. I think that's how you pronounce her name, but it was a song called Master Teachers. And in that song, she says, "Stay woke." Now, after that song came out, there were a handful of Twitter users out there who began using the hashtag Stay Woke. But in about 2013, now this is a year before the Ferguson incident, that phrase, that hashtag Stay Woke, began to be used more frequently, always in response to perceived police brutality and racism throughout the United States. That's where the phrase was being used. And so oftentimes you would see hashtag Stay Woke alongside hashtag Black Lives Matter. It was all part of that same issue. And of course, during the Ferguson riots in 2014, hashtag Stay Woke became a staple. I mean, there's a book of, of art or pictures that were taken during the Ferguson riots and all that, and on a building somebody wrote, "Stay Woke." And so after that, hashtag Stay Woke began to be used in other contexts, not just in the racial context, but in other contexts where perceived injustices were occurring. And in fact, it gained such widespread use that some people in the Black Lives Matter movement began to say that the phrase "stay woke" had been diluted and that it had lost its original purpose and meaning. Now, I'll let the social debaters tackle that issue, when and where that should be used, but I do admit personally that I am sort of drawn to that phrase in a general sense, because it seems to me apparent that there are many perceived wrongs or injustices in our world and in our communities that require a higher level of awareness, because we are often distracted by other less important things that are going on in the world. For example, a social activist recently said, quote, "While you are obsessing with the Kardashians, there are millions of homeless people in the world. Hashtag stay woke." In other words, don't be distracted by all that other stuff, unimportant stuff that's going on, like the Kardashians. So I'm sort of drawn to this phrase, stay woke, although I recognize it's grammatically incorrect, is it not? How many English-speaking people are out there that know how to speak, right? It is grammatically incorrect to say stay woke. But to me, that's part of its appeal. By being grammatically incorrect, it is, by sound and by definition, rebellious against the status quo. Now, I'm a baby boomer, and I don't know about you baby boomers out there, but I have to admit that there's part of me that loves to rebel against the status quo as long as it doesn't hurt too much. I like to rebel on occasion. Tomorrow is Martin Luther King Jr. Day, and while people in the mid-20th century civil rights movement did not use the phrase stay woke, as far as I know, it does remind us of the awakening that occurred in that era in American history, does it not? And when we see that, it also reminds us that this struggle still continues, because only a person who is asleep would suggest that race is no longer an issue in the world and in our country. And, only a person who's not awake would say that. Race is not going away anytime soon. It's going to be an issue for a long time. And I think we can say the same thing about other isms and other perceived social ills that continue to stubbornly persist in our world. And so to a large degree, I agree with the so-called social prophets of our day. I do believe there are times when someone needs to pick up a bullhorn or hold up a sign in protest for whatever perceived social ills are vexing us at the moment. And yet, I want to add this caveat. I do not agree with the use of violence to make a social statement, because I believe the use of violence diminishes one's moral high ground. I stand on that, and I firmly believe that. Once you start using violence, you've lost your message. And in fact, people will turn against you and what you're trying to say. Nevertheless, when I observe what's happening in the world, I'm sure you do as well, I'm generally supportive of those who feel the need to speak more loudly, to write more boldly, to walk more frequently. Because as Dr. King said, our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. And so I think Dr. King would be the first to say, stay woke, even though he spoke in better English than that. He would say, stay woke. Now, of course, because I am a man of the cloth or the robe and the stole, I have a slightly different take, perspective, nuance perspective on what it means to stay woke, because I'm compelled to put a spiritual spin on all of this. So I want to begin with the question, who or what should be waking us up? In other words, what is or should be our motivation to stay woke? As a person of faith, I need to consider the possibility that the one voice that needs to be heard above all the other voices out there is the still speaking voice of God. The voice of God, I contend, is what motivates us, or should motivate us, is what grounds us. It's what calls us to stay woke. I was inspired to use this phrase, stay woke, while reading our Old Testament lesson for today from 1 Samuel chapter 3, where this young boy, Samuel, hears this divine voice. He didn't know that's what it was. This voice calling out to him several times through the night. This voice kept waking up Samuel as the poor guy was trying to sleep. And I can imagine that he was thoroughly annoyed about what was happening. And you know the story, it's really kind of interesting. Let me set the context, the background. Years before the big temple was built in Jerusalem, and everything sort of was centralized there, you had, or they had, smaller worship sites we call small temples that were kind of scattered around a few places in what we call Palestine or the nation of Israel. And in one of these places called Shiloh, there was a priest, and because each temple had their own priest, it kind of was their, like the pastor of that church, and he would live there and welcome people there and do whatever they're supposed to do in those temples. And so in Shiloh, there was a guy named Eli. Now, Eli had a couple of rotten sons, and we know they were rotten because of what we read on later. And their names were Hophni and Phinehas. And as we all know, pastors' kids are the worst, right? And so the same is true for priests that lived thousands of years ago in Israel. Their kids were the worst. So anyway, they're caretaking this small temple in Shiloh. And somewhere in the community, there was a young woman named Hannah. And Hannah had been trying to get pregnant for a while and was unsuccessful. And back in that day, if you were a woman couldn't get pregnant, you were kind of looked down upon. You were being cursed by God, so it's not a good thing. And so she does what any devout, Israelite would do. She goes to the temple, the nearest temple, to pray for a child. And she promises that if she has a child, she will dedicate that child to the Lord, to Yahweh. Well, soon after, she has a son. His name is Samuel. And she fulfills her promise by leaving the boy. Can you imagine, you moms and even dads out there, leaving your child at the temple? By the way, don't get any ideas here. I'm not taking your kid. But he leaves the boy at the temple to be raised by the prophet Eli. And of course, those older rotten sons, I'm sure, do a lot of babysitting. So one night, though, Samuel, just a boy, he kept hearing his voice, his name being called. And he thought, well, Eli must be calling me. Eli, he couldn't see very well. He's getting old. He has to go to the bathroom 3 or 4 times a night. So he's thinking, I better go help out Eli. He must be calling me. So he goes, and Eli says, no, I'm not calling you. You need to go lie back down. Don't be a nuisance. Go lie down. This happened several times until Eli finally realizes, Samuel is hearing God. That's who's speaking to him. And so he instructs the boy that the next time you hear this voice, ask, what's up? No, really, he says, say this, speak, for your servant is listening. And Samuel does so. And when he hears back from this voice, the voice tells him, now imagine telling the voice of God talking to the boy, not to the priest. And he says to the boy that the house of Eli will be punished because those 2 rotten boys, Hophni and Phinehas, were blaspheming God. We don't know exactly what they were doing, but it was bad. And therefore, the sacrifices that they had been offering in the name, for the sins of the people were no longer going to be effective in that temple. It was no longer going to work because they'd been blaspheming God. Well, we all know Samuel, right? He grew up to be really the most famous prophet in early Israel's history. He chose the first 2 kings of Israel, both Saul and David. And then interestingly, it was David's son Solomon who, when he grew up, he was the one who finally managed to build the big, grand, glorious, magnificent building, temple in Jerusalem. What this story tells me is that there really is a spiritual element to staying woke. We miss it out there when we hear all the rhetoric and all the phrases and all the clashes going on. But for people of faith, this has a spiritual side to it. Yes, we should be listening to the voices that are crying out for justice in our world today. We should stay woke to the plight of the poor, the downtrodden, the sexually harassed, the bullied, the oppressed, the victims of human trafficking, all of that, all of those things that contribute to every ounce of human misery in every corner of the globe. We should be listening. But at the same time, as people of faith, we should stop and ask the question, who or what should be waking us up? And I contend that we become more attuned, more alert, and more sensitive to the voices of hurting people when we become more attuned, more alert, and more sensitive to the voice of the still speaking God. Working on our spiritual, our inner life, I believe, makes us more responsive and responsible in our public life. It is our best motivation. It's too easy, you see, to be lulled back to sleep when our motivation for being a voice for others and listening to others and acting and reacting is simply out of our own sense of compassion and empathy. It's too easy to go back to sleep because we run out of gas, we run out of steam. It's too easy to go back to sleep if we believe that the Elis of the world are the ones who are calling us to do things. Because like Samuel, we're tired. We just want to go to sleep. We want to go back to bed. We want to close our eyes to the problems of the world. But it's more difficult to go back to sleep when we believe God is calling us. When we believe God is calling our name. We stay woke best when the voice of God in our own lives is louder than the voices of others. So, to stay woke, not just be woke, but to stay woke, we need to be spiritually fortified, motivated by God's authentic call in our lives. So this is not a question about what we should be doing. We know what we should be doing. We should be working to make this a better world, right? The question is why? Why should we stay woke? I say we should stay woke because God is waking us up. Amen.